Okay, so I'm gonna talk about the aesthetics of play, and I want to focus on a few things. So firstly, I'll mention 10 rules of good level design, then I'll go to 3 pillars of video game design, then I'll move to user experience and talk about the optimal one for video games, and in the end I'm gonna talk about user feedback and if it's important or not. And obviously in the final slides I'm gonna summarize everything. And the way how I'm gonna do it is I'm gonna actually take an example of a very popular game, at least lately, which is Elden Ring. And I'm gonna go with each rule one by one and give you examples of from Elden Ring itself, just so it could be more clear to understand and way simpler to actually grasp the knowledge from this presentation itself. So the first rule is that the player should know where to go by using consistent visual language. And what it means is that, let's check here, like when you start a game, this is basically just after creating your character, you're starting in a small room, and you open the door because that's like the only option you can actually do. And as soon as you open the door, you already see that there is actually like one way that you are supposed to take. Actually, maybe there are two because there is like some ledge and you are not yet sure if you can go there or not, but there are like some blood stains that are indicating that's not really right. So you are already thinking that like this is like some kind of a stair, so probably you are supposed to go here. And this is what actually happens. Like when we move forward a bit, we see that I control the character here, obviously, but like the player knows that we are supposed to go left already, but now it's confirmed. Here we can see that there is nowhere to go. On the left there is stairs, and we also already can see that it's very straight path we have to take. So we know that we have to follow those stairs, then go onto this bridge, and then move with this bridge through this gate and go like somewhere here behind this wall, right? So very, very good visual indicators of where we are supposed to go. So I'm gonna move forward a bit because this is where it's actually starting to get interesting, because obviously straightforward visual indicators are very good for the player, but sometimes it's very good to throw a bit of confusion as well. So here, for example, well, if we follow those very basic assumptions, we know that here there is like a cliff of some sort, and we cannot really cross this place. Here is like a huge glowing tree, so it already seems like it's like a final goal or like an area that we are supposed to get to somehow. And here we see like a gate with a fog of some sort that we are supposed to take. We are thinking maybe there is like some next level, maybe a boss, maybe some enemies, because like just to remind you, this is only after starting the game. There was like no tutorial whatsoever. There was nothing at all, so we can only very intuitively like walk around using a joystick or a arrow keys or whatever, and we are just trying to understand what's happening. So we are following very, very basic instructions here. And where this confusion comes actually is when we see that I already am planning to go right, but suddenly in the middle of the screen we see that actually there is some enemy, and I'm gonna skip a bit now because this enemy, what it is actually like a very, very hard enemy to beat. And of course, like I remind you once again that we don't even know how to fight at this point, but he's designed in such a way that he is supposed to kill us. And we don't know this yet, but we actually realize that this was supposed to happen when we die. And we see this cutscene that it was planned, everything was planned. We see that we are somewhere lying dead or deadish, because I guess we are supposed to wake up soon and go onto the next level. But we already see a cutscene. We get those emotions. We see we go from this confusing element to what seems obvious now. It's like this emotional approval of, yeah, right, this is what's gonna happen all along. And this is what's important here. So this is like a very consistent visual language where we knew where to go all this time. But also what this game did was we already know what's the game gonna be like for the rest of the playthrough. So we know it's gonna be hard. We know it's gonna be sometimes very surprising and not for good, as we have this example now. It also involves us emotionally already, because we got confused, scared, angry at the same time, very surprised as well. And there is also this mood. So we know the game's gonna be dark. We know it's gonna be a role-playing game, of course. So we know there are gonna be some monsters. There's probably some melee fighting as well. But also there are some elements that are gonna confuse us all this time. And what I mean by that, it's not only how there can be some jump scare elements or some enemies that we cannot predict, but also move forward to the next short video. This is straight after the last cutscene. So here we like are waking up from this death, and on the cutscene we can already see that there is something very clear. We're supposed to take this path. Like we see this glowing tree here, and this is like a decoration. Maybe there is something there like behind this rock, but this here is like an obvious choice to take as soon as we can move our character, right? And actually it's not true, because this is another element of the confusion, because as soon as the cutscene ends and we actually can have control over our character, we can see that there is so much more happening here. Because there, of course, we have still this gate and this tree. This didn't change, but also we have this character here, and we don't know what it is. Like if it's an enemy, if it's an NPC, if it's some kind of a message thing. We have this blinking thing that already looks like a treasure. It looks like something we want to somehow get. We have this ledge. We don't know if this area is also explorable or not. We don't know what's behind us as well. We don't know if in this dark area here there is something on the left or not, because we just like started through this after this cutscene, and what seemed very, very linear on the cutscene actually turns out not to be. So when we actually wake up, like we obviously move to the first thing that's here, and we learn that we can talk to this NPC, and he says like take the plunge. So we understand that we can actually jump down, and now this is very, very good and very clear visual wayfinding, because we have only like one way we can go. So this part is blocked. Obviously we have like this very obvious path we can only take. We cannot go up again because we just dropped down. There is no ladder or anything. And we also can see this like glowing element here, so we already know we want to go there as soon as possible. We already know there is like this is this first goal that we want to achieve. And at this point, when we move towards this, we can understand that this is like a checkpoint. We have this touch grace indicator, and we realize at this point this is a tutorial of some sort. So actually this is this area that we can follow in order to learn basic mechanics, and it's very, very simple. All this time there is only one way we can go. So this is as clear as it can really be, without any confusion whatsoever, just for the player to learn how to move around, how to fight, how to use his skills, how to dodge, and just basic mechanics. And when we go out, we actually realize that we exit this tutorial area just next to this glowing, blinking thing that we saw from below. So this is like a very cool thing that developers added as a reward for actually exploring more than necessary. But also it's a good way of presenting the player with new mechanics, because we got like a strength gesture. We don't really know what that means yet, but already we can explore new mechanics. We already can see it here. So it's a very, like, not really important, but it's like a very good feeling when you actually receive something in return for spending more time on exploring the level itself. And when we leave this like tutorial area, we go to the first open area, which is called the Limgrave. And this is where I actually want to stop for a while, because I made a very basic sketch about this that presents how clear actually Elden Ring is designed. So first of all, this is very close to us. This is the first goal. This is this checkpoint thing. This is very bright, very visible, and we already know that this is like a safe place. We recognize it from the tutorial. We know we can go there to save our game. This is the place that stands out. This is the place that we need to go as soon as possible. And also, not only because it's like big compared to the rest of the things on the close to us, but also it's on the 2/3 of the screen, which is like always very very attentive. But also we have those perspective arrows, so each element that seems very naturally placed is actually showing us, is guiding us subconsciously towards this place. Those arrows are pointing towards this place, so we subconsciously realize that we are supposed to get there and to start exploring from this place. However, we also know much more from just this thing. We know that this is this ultimate goal. We have already seen it a few times. We've seen it on the cutscene. We've seen it on the first area that we have died at. So we already know it takes like so much space on the screen that it really has to be important. This is like a longer term goal. So it's like a big castle. We don't know how to get there yet, but we obviously know we'll get there, because no one would bother with modeling something so big and so standing out if it wouldn't be important. And here is this place where we died, so it's also like a very good indicator of what happened with us. So yeah. Oh, and obviously there is a first obstacle here. We can see and soldier, a knight riding on a horse from like there and back. So this is obviously our first decision to make if we want to avoid him or fight him. But nonetheless, it's very clear from the beginning that there is something that we have to go through. And the second rule is to tell the player what to do, but not how to do it. So when you start the game, you are given actually something like this. So the information from the cutscene, like cross the fog to the lands between to stand before the Elden Ring and become the Elden Lord. But we have actually no idea what it means. And we have to start exploring a bit. And when we start exploring, we actually see that we learn that there are like 10 mandatory bosses that we have to defeat in order to win the game. But it's not really the case, because they are like very non-linear. There is always something else we can do. There is no rules in taking those bosses by any order. There is no indication that we should do this in given like any specific instructions or anything. There are actually like over 160 bosses in Elden Ring, so you can do the rest of those and leave those 10 for the end, or you can just do those 10 and forget about the side quests, side missions, and exploring the world. So it's it's really up to you if you want to focus on the bosses, on the story, or if you want to do something else. So this gives this idea of non-linearity. So there is always a plan B. There is always something else you can do. If you are stuck on a boss, you can move on another area that's also open for you, and you can start leveling up there. You can start fighting the enemies on such areas and going back to the boss that were too hard for you earlier. Yeah, and of course there are like multiple objectives that can be undertaken collaterally, so at the same time, which means that it's not really the game that you are supposed to do only one thing at a time, but very often like the world is such a big place that you realize that you can like develop a few quest lines during one travel, like during one quest or during one fight. It's not really a matter of going from point A to point B, but there is like many more points on the way and many more adventures you can actually take. When it comes to the third rule, it's don't rely on words. So what it means is that in games we have three types of narratives, and there is the explicit narrative, implicit, and emergent. And basically, it means that the explicit one is a very straightforward. It just shows us what to think, what to learn from the text, from dialogues, from cutscenes, etc. The implicit is what we can figure out from what we see, and the emergent is what we can actually tell to ourselves, what we can make up from with the information we have learned from the implicit narrative. And in order to create a good narrative for the game, we actually try not to use the explicit narrative, but we combine the implicit with the emergent one, and we use something called mise-en-scene, and we create like an immersive and environmental narrative. So, for example, again, going back to Elden Ring, here is just like a very basic screenshot from the game, and how it works is that we are just going to this area and we can already observe a few things, right? So there is this vehicle right here that's kind of broken, it's crooked, so it's definitely not working correctly. There is like this loose monster that's like usually pulling those vehicles, so we understand that maybe something happened, then it's loose, the vehicle's broken. But then we also see there are like a lot of corpses of the knights on the ground. There are some wild dogs here. There are a lot of information here and there, and we see this even though there are like not any direct messages of what happened. Because of this narrative, we can make our own story from this, and we can understand that something bad happened here. This monster probably rebelled against his soldiers, killed all of them, and now if we move forward, he'll probably attack us as well, because it's really not safe there, right? And this is just from our own imagination, but also from what we see on the screen from here. The rule number 4 is to constantly teach the player something new. And it's very simple. There is this scheme that I've prepared. So in order to constantly teach the player something new, we need to go through the learning phase, then to playing, challenging this thing that the player has already learned, and then surprise them with something they did not expect. And I have prepared like a very short video. So for example, in Elden Ring, you are very quickly given a shield, and you learn very easily how to block with this shield. But at the same time, sometimes it does not really work that well, because with some enemies you cannot block all the damage and you can run out of stamina. So what happens here, we actually can challenge ourselves to come up with like a different use of this shield, and there comes this parry mechanic, and we learned that we can actually parry some enemies to almost instantly kill them with an counter attack. So going back to this scheme, we learn how to use the shield, we play and realize that it does not block all of the damage. We challenge a player with an enemy that is spamming attack, so it's draining out of stamina and it's making it difficult to fight him. And then we surprise ourselves and the players with the mechanic of parrying the enemies. Also, it's very important to make the game surprising, and I know that a lot of Souls-like games are very well known for this. So, for instance, like, it's very common for Elden Ring to have like a very weak enemy, and then actually surprised the player with the fact that it's a fake weakness and it's actually like an extremely hard to beat enemy that will kill us like very, very quickly. But it can also mean, for example, that when we have a boss, the bosses in Elden Ring usually have two phases. So even if we can learn the pattern of the boss through the first phase, and we already think that we know that we more or less know what's going to happen, then the second phase comes, and in this example, suddenly we realize that the second phase starts with the guy coming out from the sky and instantly destroying just our health bar. So it's very common for Elden Ring fights to be constantly changing, to surprise the player with non-predictable movements and to force them to come up with new solutions for the problem that the game is giving them. But also Elden Ring has this mechanic that's called illusory walls, which is like a hidden secret, I guess, but it's not really hidden because the game itself is hinting you the existence of such thing, but at the same time it's never really clear when those walls are because they are very discrete. But this is this element of surprise that when you discover a whole new area or a whole new environment just because it was hidden behind the door is also a very nice idea of surprising a player with and to make him motivated to try and seek more opportunities to explore, to even run around and hit some walls to see if they are not illusionary. So we need to keep things fresh and non-predictable, and that's actually what I try to show you, but very simply summarized. So we avoid predictable and repetitive actions, and we avoid this routine, and we try to keep things like just very refreshing and very exciting all the time. So for number 6, we want to empower the player. So the reason we play games is that we want to fulfill this fantasy. We don't want to live this real world. So we need to let it happen. We need to go with this like non-real actions that are worth fighting for, and actually also there needs to be some long-term goals that are worth exploring, leveling up more to get. There are just good goals to fight for in general because it keeps the user engaged towards the game. So for example here I want to like show you 2 sorceries in Elden Ring. The first one is like a basic one you get at the start from the game. It requires 10 intelligence, and it's just like a very basic sorcery that's just damaging the enemies. It looks something like this. But we also have another one that's that requires 70 intelligence, which is insane amount of levels to get. It takes a lot of time, but it's called like Renala's Full Moon. It looks like very impressive already, and this is like this goal we want to achieve, and when we actually achieve it and we can use this spell, the animation itself is so empowering. Like we are literally changing into a moon to throw it around enemies. It's just this feeling that the player wants to get from the game, that he has something worth fighting for, and it actually succeeds in giving him this feeling of fulfillment, you know. For the number 7 is like to make your game easy, medium, and hard at the same time, and I'll explain it in 2 ways. So first of all, we of course have this possibility in Elden Ring. Like for example, the Elden Ring added this mechanic of summoning ashes, some like NPCs and other players that can help you, and that is considered like a mechanic to make the game easy. We can play it on a medium level, which is like just like a normal gameplay. We try to explore, we try to investigate, we play the game like very naturally, like we die a lot, but we are just like trying to get better in order to to move through the story, etc. And there is also like a hard way, so we rely only on our skills. We do not get any help from the NPCs, from the ashes, from any other players, from any other sources, and we very often pursued like any some additional challenges, like some time limits, or maybe like no death runs or something like this. But at the same time, what this rule means is that there has to be like a possibility for the player to choose during the gameplay very often if he wants to pursue like a hard fight, or if he wants to take the easy way but the safer one. So just for example, one of the first levels has this like area that's very optional. You don't have to go there at all. And personally, I've spent there like 8 hours, I think, because it was such a hard area, but I was so willing to go through, because I had this idea in my mind that there has to be something like amazing at the end of this level if it's so difficult. And it actually was. There was like this talisman or amulet or whatever that was like raising all of the attributes, so it was this high reward, but this risk and this time that I had to take was my choice. So of course I got something very good at the end, but I could have also just ignored this area completely and just move towards the obligatory bosses, for example. Then we move to the efficiency. So the obvious like use of efficiency is just in the terms of real possibilities. So it comes with finances, of your team's possibilities, of your time limits, etc. But what's more important is how we can achieve non-linearity, even if the game is indeed kind of linear. And the answer for that is to fake it a bit, because the way to do it is to actually show the player that even though in the end like all of the players are getting the same result, so every single player that has beaten the game is actually becoming like he's standing before this Elden Ring and this killing this final boss, we want the players to think that it's not what happened at all, that he had this amazing story, like one of a kind story. He made his own choices of how to develop it. He has made his own choices and his own decisions, and he did what he wanted to do. And that's partially true, but again, in the end, we have to fight those 10 bosses, and we have to reach this Elden Ring. So we try to keep this idea of having control, but in fact, we have some basic controls in the end that the player isn't just supposed to feel as a linear thing. Number 9 is to create emotions. So what it means basically is to feel your character's emotions. As a player, you're supposed to feel what the character is feeling. You are supposed to relate to the story. You're supposed to engage into it. And Elden Ring actually does it very well. It has a bit of a Game of Thrones atmosphere, because it's very often sad emotions. So, for example, like the quest lines that are in Elden Ring are very story driven. So, for example, this is just an area that we go through, and we see this NPC, and we see that there is this blind girl that is basically asking us for help because her castle was attacked and by some monster, and her dad is still there, and she really wants to see her dad, and she gives us this letter that we are supposed to deliver to him. And she asks us for help because she obviously is blind and it's not safe for her to go there. So we take this path, we go to this castle, we beat all of this monster, we reach this dad, and the first thing is that this dad is extremely happy that we'll have delivered this letter, but at the same time he says he cannot leave this castle when it's still occupied by monsters. So we are also getting emotionally involved into this character, and we try to help him, and we defeat the monster, and we retrieve like his sword from the monster. And when we finally do it, he finally says that he can go back to his daughter and he can see her because now the castle is safe. And it looks like the quest is over. There's a happy ending, but it's not really true, because when we go back to this daughter to see how things are, we actually see that it's quite tragic, because the daughter is dead and we are very surprised. We had no idea what's going on, and we see this sort of that the monster in the castle were using, and we see that she was killed by the monsters. The father has this extreme guilt about himself and about not caring about her daughter more than about the castle he wanted to protect. And it's just so devastating, because we get this like emotional attraction, like this relation between those characters. We want this to end very well, but then it's just shattered in an instant, and we are living what this character is living. We're just living this sadness, we're living this disappointment, and this is how we are supposed to achieve this. We are supposed to make the player feel those emotions in general. And for number 10, the rule number 10 is that the game is supposed to be driven by mechanics. And what it means that the mechanics that we learn throughout the game are not supposed to be just like one-time use mechanics, but we are supposed to be constantly remembering about them. We have like in general like short memory, so we need to be reminded all the time that those mechanics are important. So for example, in Elden Rings, in late game, you need to learn all of the you need to use all of the very basic mechanics to actually progress in the game. So the walls that I have showed you are necessary to discover like even mandatory locations. We need to find them in order to progress through some quest lines. The torches can become some sorts of guides in snowy areas. There are some magical traps in dungeons that you can parry, and not only enemies now. The horse you are getting literally after 10 minutes of playing the game, and you learn that he can jump, is actually necessary to master this mechanic to unlock new areas. And it's very important to work your game like this, because it makes the player appreciate the mechanics that he has learned throughout his whole gameplay. It doesn't look like all of the new skills are replacing the old ones, but they are more of an addition to the ones that he has already learned. Moving to the second part, I'm also going to stick with the example of the Elden Ring here. I want to talk about the 3 pillars of video games, and those are gameplay, story, and presentation. In particular, the connection between them. So between gameplay and story, there is interactive narrative. Story and presentation, there is world building, and presentation and gameplay is like affordances and intentionality. And I'm actually going to start with this affordances and intentionality just to explain this term a bit, because you might actually ask yourself what this affordance is in general, because it's not something a lot of areas use as a design element. But affordance is simply an element that's indicating you the design of an element that's indicating you the actual function of it. So, for example, this is a very bad example of an affordance. Those handles are looking exactly the same, and the only distinction is that we have those words, pull and push. And it's a very bad affordance, because like it's very confusing. We see those handles and we want to pull them immediately, and only when we are getting this getting stopped by the doors, we only then read the sign that we're supposed to push. So we can actually design those door handles like this, and which is more clear because the push handle is actually non-existent, so we have to push the doors. But what it means is that we can actually go a step further and do it like this without any text at all, and then make the handles and make the doors work in like every country, not only English speaking ones. And this is basically what affordance is. So this is like the minimum of what you have to achieve with the visual signs to convey the function of the object as simply as it's possible. And in the game, it's very important to have those affordances consistent. So it's very important not to, for example, make two doors look exactly the same, but make one interactive and while the other is not. In Elden Ring, for example, these affordances are very, very simple. So, for example, here, what I have marked on blue here is just the way we can go. Red is obviously like walls or non-crossable area, so we already see the path we can take and the path we cannot really, like the boundaries of the level. And on what I have marked on the green is a trap, and this trap is also a possibility. This is an affordance that we can see in a lot of those dungeons. It's always interactive. In every single dungeon, you can shoot an arrow or hit this trap, and then it will stop working. It will go down a bit or up depending on the level, and it will just change. But the crucial thing here is that it's never changing. This affordance is constantly interactive and it's constantly designed in the same way. So when the player sees this trap, he already knows that he can shoot an arrow at it and something will happen. Yeah, so what it means here to be consistent, so each time you see this trap, you already know you can operate it, as I said. And when it comes to low-level affordances, they need to be very clear and consistent, and this is what I said about the doors. So the player needs to know what is interactable and what's not already. By just looking at this thing, he needs to define what he can work with and what's just like a decoration. But when it comes to high-level affordances, it's a variety of possibilities. So we have some affordances that present this ability for the player to choose what action he actually wants to take. So it's kind of like this rule of tell what but not how. So we have like a level design, but a lot of different paths for the player to go through. And in such like high level affordances, the game also very often actually encourages like this cheating or even cheesy ways of solving the problems by the players. And one of those examples is this affordance in one of the levels in Elden Ring. So, for example, we see that there is a very good price here. It looks like it's very good because, first of all, it's protected by a very strong enemy here. Secondly, there is a gap here. And third of all, it's you cannot really see it on when I pause the video, but it's quite late in the game, so you can like recognize the quality of the rewards through the colors and the amount of the glowing effect that it provides. And here, what the game did has put this affordance here, and it looks just like a decoration, but it's actually not. It's a way for the player to use it as this cheesy way of skipping the whole part, the whole boss fight, and the whole long way of receiving this reward, and just simply jump from this affordance to the area when you can retrieve the reward. And again, this gap here is what helps you to go back to the area you have just previously been. By the way, this reward that's here is a very, very good item in the game. So I wanted to use this as this encouragement because it's not a way for the developers to kind of tease the player, but to actually encourage them to go out of to open their minds a bit and to think of unconventional ways of achieving the rewards. So when it comes to affordances and intentionality, I feel like affordances are always facilitating player intentionality. So the affordance let us choose our intentions towards our actions. So to have those conscious choices with some goals and consequences. So we see this affordance of this will, we choose to try to get on this, and we have this goal of getting this reward. And as a consequence, we can skip this whole boss fight and everything, and you can just try to go back and get stronger before continue this level. And why this is important is that intentionality is actually the heart of the immersion. So it doesn't really matter in the end if the game itself is linear or non-linear, but if it's good, if there is like a good intentionality, it will feel very immersive for the player and very good to play. So what does it actually mean to have this intentionality? Well, intentionality is basically choice, motivation, and information and time at the same time. So it's like the player's ways of solving the problems that he is given. And how it works is that we are getting a lot of different equipment in Elden Ring. We are getting a lot of different options of upgrading our character, and we can uniquely combine this in our own ways to come up with some good synergies, to come up with good problem-solving ideas that comes from our own intention. So we choose, we are motivated by some goals, like with some vision of what we want to look like, what we want to feel like, what we want the game to feel like. We have some informations, and we have some time that's also needed, and we combine all of this to go with this problem solving idea. And it's very important to for intentionality to have clear and consistent affordances. So again, it's the same as this 10 rows. We need those clear and consistent visual indicators. We need long-term goals, and we need player initiated actions. So I'm going straight back to this screenshot from like one of the first slides, because we have everything that's here on this slide on the second one. So we have very clear affordances, we have very clear goals, we have long-term goals, and we also have choices we already have to make. So these obstacles, I told you during this slide that we already have to choose if we want to fight it, if we want to sneak past, if we want to go the other way. There is like many choices. And there is this loop that's actually summarizing how the player's intentionality can be defined as, and it's basically observing the environment, planning your actions, executing them, and then reacting to some possible outcomes. It's very easily observable in some stealth elements. So, for example, in this tutorial area, we see there is we observe that there is this sneakable, hideable environment. We see that there is this enemy, so we plan to sneak and kill him. Sneakily, we backstab. We play this action by backstabbing him, and we react to him dying, which was like lucky for us, but it's just basically we now actually from here can observe that we can go there, we plan to go there, we execute this, and we react to what's going to happen there as well. And as I said, intentionality affects the perception of linearity. So the choices that I have mentioned are what makes the game feel different every single time. So if the game would be very linear, you wouldn't really play it again because it would feel like the same thing. But for example, here, those 3 screenshots are 3 of my own Elden Ring characters, and I have played them like one after another, and every single gameplay feels different because of different builds I took, because different choices I took, and because of the different quest lines I wanted to pursue. And let's finish with this intentionality for now and move to world building. And for the world to be good, it needs to be unique, cohesive, and meaningful. So also I'm gonna combine the explanation of this with specific. So what it means is that your world has to be unique and specific. So it has to be specific for your world, but and also unique, also very detailed and very meaningful. And we need to make the player feel like this is something important. This is one of a kind words, and it's already presenting some emotions for the player as well. And always be world building. That means that we can treat every single affordance, we can treat every single decorative element and all word details as an opportunity to tell a story, because world building is also a narrative, and we need to treat it as one. And we also can use world building to say things about not only objects or the environment that's surrounding us, but also about the people that are living in this world. So world building is also storytelling, it's empathy and compassion. So, for example, here, when you are supposed to go into an area of a magical school, you discover that actually the door is locked and you cannot proceed with a glimpse without like a key. You get this map, and when you actually follow this map, you get to this point where you find a dragon, and you find a mage that was killed by the dragon and that was holding this key. So instead of just giving the player a mark with just a random object lying on the ground that was supposed to be the key, we get this story that some mages were supposed to meet in this place but were killed by a dragon, and this is how we can actually retrieve this key to enter to finally enter this school. Also, when it comes to world building, it's a very nice idea to treat as many elements as you can as a non-decorative elements. So, for example, here, instead of choosing an obvious path, so instead of just going where I was I guess supposed to go, so here, because it's just like very clear path, I chose to see if this affordance right here is indicating something. And indeed it was, because it allowed me to jump on this roof, it allowed me to check these planks, and I could understand that all of those affordances, everything about this world, is an opportunity for the player to explore, is an opportunity to seek new areas. There is something exciting, something interesting, everything seems explorable, and this is how the game also gives you the this immersion as well, because you feel like it's so developed, so well developed, so interactive, and so full of choices because of this good world building that is very immersive and very well developed for the player. And we also want to use this interactive narrative in world building. So what it means is that we want some simple choices to change the narration of the game. So for example, we want that a choice of sparing some enemy will change how the world will look like. So for example, he will become our friend and will kill a monster that was blocking our way to a certain level. Or maybe someone would get mad about something we did and would flood a room we are supposed to go to. So a game isn't supposed to be a movie. So it's not something we're just watching. It's not something we are experiencing, but this is something we are living. We are playing this, and we are making this interactive. So again, this is what helps to make the player's emotions be the same as the character's emotions. This is again why it's important for the player to feel like he's in the character's skin. So again, choices, like we need to choose a lot of things. Choices are used very widely in the recent games, and this is what makes the narrative interesting. In Elden Ring, we have already discovered 6 different, completely different endings for the game, but those vary from a lot of different choices you can take throughout the whole game. So this is why it's different. Like, even with taking similar actions, you can still have 6 different endings, and that means you can at least play the same game but with like differently 6 times, not obviously not counting the minor possibilities that you can change, minor choices that you can change during next playthroughs. So to summarize this interactive narrative, we need to do more than just show and tell. We need to engage the player to interact with the environment, with the story, and we need to empower this intentionality. We need to make the player feel like his choices are actually having some consequences, and that helps us to actually use, but also to achieve this third point, is to engage the user's emotions in his mind and not only on screen. So when there is something intense, we actually need to feel this tension ourselves and not just to understand that is happening on the screen. And now I'll move towards the user experience and optimal user experience for video games. And here I'm actually gonna talk about a talk from Celia Hodent, a game user experience consultant, and I'll use some of her examples because they're just so clear and well developed. So I'll start with defining or maybe explaining a bit what's this good user experience. And Hasilia says it's a combination of usability and engageability. Usability is like a pretty obvious term, but engageability means that it's a motivation plus emotions plus a game flow. So we need all those elements to achieve engageability. So we need engageability and usability to achieve a good user experience. So we need to ask ourselves when developing a game, why as a player should I even try to get something? And it can be different for 2 examples. There are like 2 different ways for the player to be motivated about achieving something. The first way is a extrinsic motivation, which is just teasing the player to show him the reward. So, for example, as in the one of the first slides in this tutorial area, we were teased with this reward that we wanted to get already, to actually try and take another way instead of just going out through the doors and try to achieve this reward that was presented to us in the beginning. So simply said, it's like do something, get something. But we also have a intrinsic motivation, which is kinda like doing something just for the sake of doing it, but it seems like the player would not do something just because. So we need to understand how to get this motivation without actually teasing him with anything. So just for the sake of doing this. And what works best for intrinsic motivation is what's called SDT, which is a self-determination theory, and a it's a idea that's based on 3 elements. So we need competence, autonomy, and relatedness for the player to be motivated by himself to actually undertake some actions. So we need the player to feel the sense of progression and feel that he is in control. We need the player to understand that his choices are meaningful and he can express himself through those actions. And we also need this element of relatedness, so we need some cooperative or competitive elements as well. So what else is needed for good user experience? Well, We also need to remember that perception is influenced always by some factors that are very hard for us to predict for each user, because everyone is actually come across different factors, and this is again this like idea of living in a bubble. So we have to understand that what's obvious for us doesn't have to be obvious for another person, because maybe it's just like those factors that we have come across throughout our lives that have made those facts obvious and just very, very direct for us. And as an example, I'm just gonna show you this picture, and if this is a recording, you stop it and try to guess what's presented on here. And I'm gonna move forward, because probably, even though it's the same picture for everyone, some of you know it, some of you don't. And the only factor that's actually decisive on this is if you have ever seen Lucky Luke, a cartoon that I have watched as a child. Because if you see it, you already see the same thing on those Lego bricks. But if not, there is nothing you can do about it. And we need to remember about this when designing a good user experience. So we need to remember that without a factor, we cannot understand and memorize the experience. So we need to remember about the context and the meaning. So for example, here I chose a short clip from Celia's talk, how she chose like a context for her tutorial area in Fortnite.
Needs to get out of the pit.
So she put a player in a pit, and this is how she wants the player to learn to actually interact with objects, to destroy them, and to start building, because there is this motivation for the player. He needs to get out of this pit. He needs it. He has like no time pressure. He has like a lot of materials, but at the same time, there is no way for him to progress through the game if he won't do what's actually needed for the tutorial to be completed. So this is this context and meaning, but this allows me to very smoothly move to user feedback, because, well, to answer this question very simply is yes, like user feedback is obviously important. And I'm gonna give you this example of this Fortnite tutorial in the pit, because how it was before, well, it wasn't really working, because this is the tutorial how it was before. And this is, Celia is talking about how they looked through recordings of other players and how confusing it was for the player to understand that he cannot destroy this tractor and is supposed to protect it, but also had no idea how to do it. So he had to build something, but there was no space, because he had in his mind this idea of protecting the tractor, but he had no idea that he has to destroy those elements in order to place a wall here. So only after watching this user feedback, they realized that this is not clear for everyone, and that this is, again, very, very influenced by another like external factors. And for some users, they started building walls around this whole barn, but very quickly realized that there is simply not enough material to do so. And that actually helped to Celia to develop this idea of the pit that I have showed you on the previous video, that works so well right now. And another good user feedback example is how in Fortnite we have those weak points. And actually, I'm gonna mute myself for a second now, because I'm gonna play this video with sound, because Celia explains this user feedback in a very, very good manner. So I'm gonna let you listen to her for a bit.
Ignoring this completely, so they were not aiming at it. And this is a problem because if the system design is based on the assumption that players are going to use these weak points, then if they don't use it, of course, it's going to take more time and feel super grindy. So we can iterate on it to make it more obvious, because players, when I was asking them what is this, they were like, I don't know. And so they iterated a little bit on it, so now it's more popping out. And so this is what we observed. We're hoping that players would aim at it. And they don't. And like, what's going on? And we were asking players, so what is this? And they were answering, oh, it's just a sign telling me that I'm targeting that element. Like, all right, so now they see it, but they don't understand what it means. And what the design team did was pretty smart. And instead of giving that weak point feature right away, they put it in the skill tree. So now it's something that you need to buy at some point, and it becomes an event a little bit more. So of course, a lot of players don't read, so don't rely on people reading for your stuff. But because there's much more process going on into, oh, I'm unlocking something, it's going to do something, then it has more meaning. And what we observed are more players, not 100%, but more players finally hitting these damn weak points.
So, analyzing this feedback and also working with this idea of context and meaning allowed Celia to develop this idea of rewriting this mechanic as a reward, giving this meaning, and making the user actually use it.
Ignoring this complete.
So, user feedback is also very useful when it comes to false affordances. This video I'll show you in a second also comes from Fortnite, and false affordances basically means that it's a design that's too dangerously looking like something that's useful. Like, it looks like it's supposed to do something for the game, it has some function, but it can be only a decoration. So here, for example, we have this just like a decorative elements, but so many players in Fortnite have treated those as a reactors in some other mission that they have tried to put those buttons, those elements next to those affordances. And Celia said it was actually like during her talk, it was actually like 15 or 20 minutes of such actions, of such confusion, because the players have to get a very clear message of what's actually interactive and what's not. This is what I said before, but now I'm saying this in the context of user feedback. So we know now why is it important to watch actually or to listen to users, because what's clear for us that we are designing as just a decoration for users can be treated as a very important element. So to summarize everything, well, those are those 10 rules of good level design. So we need to know where to go by using this consistent visual language. So we need those indications, we need those walls or those perspective guidances. We need to have like a very clear goal that works on us both subconsciously and consciously. We need to be told what to do but not how to do it to engage the user on problem solving ideas. We need to create a language that does not rely on words, so we need to go with our ideas based on some visuals instead. We need to constantly teach the players something new. We need them to feel like there is something more to learn. There is something more advanced to the mechanic that we already know, some other ways of using the weapon we already use. There always has to be something surprising in the context of like the small actions, but also moving to like the fifth element, the whole game needs to be surprising. It needs to be non-repetitive, it needs to be non-predictable, and just to avoid the routine, because no one will finish a game if it will just feel like the same level and played 10 times over and over again. And also we need to make the player feel empowered, so to live this fantasy, to feel like he's actually having some amazing skills, some very good weapons, that there is some long-term goal that he wants to achieve and to actually fulfill this goal. we need to make our game easy, medium, and hard. So we need a high risk, high reward mechanic. So we need the player to be able to choose which path to take. We need the game to be efficient. So again, both for the real world efficiency, but also we need to be efficient in how we want to achieve the feeling of non-linearity. So we need to fake it, I guess, how I said before, that even if a game is linear, we need to make it feel like it is not. And then we need to work with emotions. We need the player to feel characters' emotions. We need the game to be driven by mechanics. So the things we learn throughout the game need to be important for the whole gameplay. When it comes to the three main pillars of video games designs, we have gameplay, story, and presentations, and those are the factors that are working between each one of those. And this is this loop that's very, very important, that we firstly observe, then we plan to do something, we execute it, and we react to these consequences. This is very important, as intentionality is what makes the game immersive. We also need to remember that very often affordances are what's making the player's intentions clear. So why the intentionality is the heart of the immersion? Again, because it affects the perception of linearity. So it just makes the things not really boring. It just makes the things surprising, exciting, and just fun to play. And when it comes to good user experience, we need usability plus engageability. And we can motivate the player throughout extrinsic motivation or intrinsic motivation. So either a reward, or we use this self-determination theory, which I have explained before, that consisted of those three elements. And we also need to remember that to get something into our memory, we need to perceive things that are influenced by some factors that are not the same for all of us. So we need to remember that each one of us has different experiences, different factors that he has come across throughout his life. And just we need to go out of that bubble. We need to work with those factors. And it's actually very good here to mention the user feedback as well, because it's only sometimes during the user feedback re-evaluation that we can see that those factors that we have seen as obvious are actually not. This is the bibliography if you would want to see the sources that I have used for this presentation. And in general, that's all from me. So thank you very much, and I hope you have enjoyed this topic and you have enjoyed everything that I have talked about, and that it was clear for you. Thank you.